Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Travis Terry. I am the president of Capalino, which is a leading urban strategy firm in New York. I put on my pilot gear for today as I have the privilege of being a moderator rather, of what is a very important discussion entitled The Organizational Strategies for Addressing the Impacts of Recent and Future U.S. Supreme Court Decisions, a subject that I know is on the top of many people's minds, and the topic our panelists today have been spending a lot of time advising clients on. As everybody knows who's been a part of our Future of New York webinars, all of which, by the way, are on the Capalino website. Our goals are to partner with experts in a variety of different fields to provide our audience with information that could be helpful in making important organizational decisions, and maybe inspire folks to be a little more engaged economically and civically to make our city and I guess now our world and our nation better and more fair. Joining me today are some incredibly smart people. I know I've learned a lot from them. First is my brilliant colleague, someone who I have learned a massive amount from, Jeanne Mullgrav. She is a managing director at Capalino who oversees our social impact team and advises our clients on a number of matters relevant to today, including ESG, which is environmental sustainability and governance, and CSR, corporate social responsibility. We love what we call TLAs, three-letter acronyms, on everything we do. Jeanne and I are also excited to be joined by our very good friends at ArentFox Schiff, one of the nation's leading law firms on, well, everything. Please welcome Darrell, a labor and employment partner, and Mamta, Shah, a corporate partner at the firm with a focus on employee benefits and executive compensation. I would read you all the bios, but believe me, they are incredibly impressive, very long, a lot of accomplishments, and I don't want to take the whole hour just reading bios because there's a lot to cover and a lot to learn. Okay, so on to our topic. It is a complicated and hopefully it is complicated, and hopefully our panelists can shine some light on this. But without a doubt, I think we have to acknowledge that organizations can no longer ignore what is going on with the Supreme Court. Our staffs and our external stakeholders are demanding we as leaders opine on things and activate on them. Clients, customers, and workers will undoubtedly make decisions on what to buy, where to work, where to live, based on an organization or government's position on important social matters. Brands will be impacted. Brand value will be impacted. And if you don't believe me, here's just a few results of some of the polls. A recent Forbes Women survey concluded that 66% of college-educated workers say that they would not take a job in a state that prohibits abortion after 6 weeks, as Texas now does. 73% of Gen Zers, which are 24 and younger, including my kids, said they would not. 69% of respondents in a Undum national poll said that access to reproductive health care, including abortion, should be a part of the issues companies address when it comes to gender issues in the workplace. So the world is telling us that we have to address these complicated and profound issues that impact our lives. All right, so it is essential that everybody take note of this. And with that, I'm going to get into our questions and really just start a discussion. So panelists, welcome. Thank you so much again for being here. Maybe I'll just start with a basic question and sort of turn it over to the ArentFox. Oh, wait, before that, I do that, just a quick housekeeping note. We are going to turn this over to audience questions later on at about 2:45 or so. So if you have questions you'd like us to cover, please put it in the Q&A section on the bottom of the Zoom. Okay, so the ArentFox team, I would love to just hear your, general take on the Supreme Court. Is what we're seeing normal? Should we be expecting the unexpected? What should we be anticipating going forward?
So first, let me say that I want to make it clear to those listening, please don't take anything any of us say today as legal advice, because the particulars of your unique facts could alter the reality of what we advise any client to do. So absent talking directly to your lawyer and getting advice based upon particulars of your organization, you shouldn't take any generalized discussion as being a legal principle that you follow. Having said that, I don't think we have anything normal anymore. So therefore, to say, are we going to be seeing this normally? I don't know. I don't think anyone can predict where we're going. The Supreme Court, in my opinion, gave two decisions, one on Thursday about gun rights, talking about the need for individual rights, and on Friday gave a decision almost flipping the opposite side of the coin, talking about the abortion issue, ignoring the individual rights of women. So I think, unfortunately, we're looking at too much partisanship and political flavor than we are about real sound judicial reasoning. So I'm not sure, I don't know if you agree or not, but I don't think we can really say what's sure. And if you look at every pundit, even my thoughts on this is we are looking for a time period of mass confusion relative to the law. And to your point, Travis, about not only is it going to create havoc among companies trying to find and hire people, but everyone who's reading on economics is saying all these principal policies are going to create economic downfall for the jurisdictions that are imposing these.
Yeah, Darrell, I absolutely agree. I mean, the idea is that the Supreme Court is supposed to be an independent body that performs its responsibilities without regard to the other branches of government. And I think that is no longer the case. And as Darrell alluded to, we had a decision on one day which sought to protect individual rights, and a decision the next day that went in the opposite direction. So if we were asking the question, should we be expecting the unexpected? If the unexpected is rulings that further the policies of a particular government's agenda or particular view, then I would say no. That is expected, I think, with this court. But if the unexpected is that long established precedent may no longer be respected, I think, Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, already set the stage for that.
Yeah, that is very true. Very, very true. Jeanne, let me bring you a little into the conversation too. So obviously, as with this change in the Supreme Court and some of these decisions being impacting our personal lives, personal beliefs, et cetera, I know you've been spending a lot of time lately with clients, sort of talking to them and coaching them on how to respond to this. And I was just curious, maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of what you're telling them these days, and kind of what are some of the aspects that they should be looking at.
Sure. Well, certainly many Fortune 500, those companies that are household names have already responded. They responded immediately. But what you'd still have a number of smaller companies that are sort of sitting on the sidelines. I'm saying in order to be competitive in this time of the Great Resignation, we still have about 2 million fewer women in the workforce. The time is now to really weigh in on this issue. Employers really need to take a hard look at their benefit packages and policies that not only pertain to abortion, but I think because this is an issue that mostly affects women, really take the time to take a hard look at other benefits that women might be concerned about, caretaker benefits that deal with childcare, flexibility options, and look and see how that squares with what your employees are asking for. And clearly there's a lot of external support for. They should also take a look at their confidentiality policies. HIPAA covers a lot, but and I'm sure Darrell will tell you it doesn't cover everything, and it doesn't cover often, traveling from one state to another to get care. So people are concerned about what they tell their manager, what they tell their HR director, and how can they keep that confidential. Finally, I think this is an opportunity to restore some of the power that's been lost. And part of that is helping your employees engage with the causes and engage with the nonprofits that that are important to them. It's a way for them to give back. It's a way for them to get more connected to some of these issues on the policy level. So maybe your company wants to give time off to volunteer. Maybe you want to do a matching program. These are all things that you're seeing some enlightened companies doing.
I can take that a little step further, Travis. Typically, as we go into the fall, a lot of companies start looking at their open enrollment program for healthcare, and they start negotiating their benefit package for next year. And usually the discussion is about the economics and whether or not their past year's experience results in the premiums being higher or whatever it might be. You've got a whole new brave world now. Now you've got to look at the question about the degree you're looking at policy and you're negotiating policy. Are you negotiating with a company that if you want to support abortions, that will provide abortions for you and cover the cost of abortions? Do you have a company that will cover, and to the degree in this new brave world we have, where so many, particularly New York companies, have employees working in other states like Florida, North Carolina, Texas? What does that mean? Does your company, healthcare carrier, still provide insurance coverage if people live in those jurisdictions? They will have to come up this way. Who's going to be the conveyor of the message? Is it going to be the companies? Is it going to be the insurance carriers? Is it going to be the EPA program? You're going to need to look at your leave programs, because if you're giving leave and you have someone in Texas or Florida who needs to take leave to come up to New York or somewhere else, it's in a question of not, is the policy, do they have leave coverage that allow them to cover, get paid, because that's the loss of time. If they're getting the abortion, or if they have a family member who needs to get the abortion, you need to look at your policies on what you call it, the free speech, because in a great degree, dress code, and we're gonna have people wanting to wear T-shirts saying, right to life. Others say, you call it abortion rights, and that might create speech issues and dissension in the workplace. So you need to look at the dress code policy, whether or not you have that. You need to look at your, policies regarding wearing of buttons. People might wear buttons supporting these causes. All these things have to be looked at. And a lot of these things might also create, in addition to those conflicts, problems with the National Relations Act and the area called considered protected activity, because the degree you limit that and you're creating a limitation of speech, you have a very aggressive LRB that wants to say you can't do that. So there's a lot of different things. I mean, we talked about the gun decision that came down Thursday, right before the Dobbs decision, Bruen decision. And there you got to look at some companies that come to me and say, we want gun policies that say they can't bring the gun on the workspace. So, I mean, the amount of work you need to do is much more than ever before, and where you might not have always called in counsel, benefits counsel, labor counsel, other counsel to do this. You need to really consider that much more so than ever.
I really should have went to law school. Mamta, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Just to expand on what Darrell has alluded to, this has really, we've been hearing a lot after the Dobbs decision on employers putting in travel reimbursement policies, but this has really created a momentum for employers to really start looking at their health insurance policies. To what extent does it cover abortion services? Does it only cover voluntary abortion services? If I sponsor a health FSA program that reimburses for medications, what medications are covered? Can an employee get reimbursement for medications related to abortion services? Paid leave, are employees going to be, to what extent employees are going to be able to take leave for abortion related services? And then at the same time, I think it has also forced employers to look at, what information are they collecting in connection with these benefits? If someone asks for paid leave, are we asking for what reason they're requesting the leave? How is data being protected that is being provided by employees? So, this is a really broad issue, has really created an opportunity and, forced employers to really look at the benefits they're providing on a much larger scale.
One thing
Yeah.
that employers should do, is have an open and honest dialogue with their employees. Engage them in that process so that there is, some consensus around what the goals are. And also, you may want to have this, this committee in place, because you may be looking at things like gay marriage in the future, and want to look at ways that you can preserve those rights should the Supreme Court weigh in on that.
And I'd say that, they have to look at laws, not just the federal laws, but local state laws. There's some state laws and city laws, depending where you're located, that might go beyond the federal law. And you really got to look at the whole picture to understand what you're confronting with, because you might have one jurisdiction where you're principally located that says X. You might have an office in a certain location, and understand something. People don't always understand this. When you allow an employee to work remotely, you effectively become an employer in that jurisdiction, which means you're subject to all the laws, tax laws, and labor and employment laws in that jurisdiction. And you have to look and see what might apply there that doesn't necessarily apply where you're based in.
So Darrell, let's spend a second on that. So what you're saying is, if I have remote employees, say in Texas, that might have conflicting laws of New York and might have right to prosecute laws in Texas, I have to be aware of and start to think about the implications of Texas law on my business?
I believe this insanity that we're about to face on the aiding and abetting provisions and the bounty laws that are coming out of places like Texas have unforeseen consequences. I mean, there is a law firm called Sidley Austin that has been already threatened, where they're saying that because Sidley Austin is having policies in place supporting the rights of their employees to have abortions, and they have two offices in Texas, a Chicago-based law firm with offices in Texas, where they're threatening that firm threatening lawyers with disbarment from Texas practice. You've got some financial institutions in the country who have been told by some of the local jurisdictions that they're not going to do business with those financial institutions anymore because the companies as a whole are supporting the right of their employees to have abortion. You got South Carolina that has come up with a proposed bill that'll make it illegal, both criminally and civilly, if you communicate with a person about how to get an abortion, either by text or email. So we are looking at the amount of craziness going on relative to how people are looking to basically create a greater perspective of pro-life is really unlimited and undefined.
Do I, as an employer, have the responsibility to educate everybody on our staff, for example, that if they were to text somebody from South Carolina about how to give an abortion, that they could be legally responsible?
I can't tell you about every jurisdiction. I
Right.
can say that I've never heard of it. You're having a duty to do that, but to the degree that understand something, degree it's your company's policy, you're the president of your company. You might make the mistake of going through a state like Texas on business and suddenly have someone walk up to you and put handcuffs on you and tell you you're now being locked up and being held because you have an employee in Texas and you have a policy that violates the law. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying
Right.
that the craziness that we're seeing here could potentially have that be a possibility.
Jeanne, we've talked a lot about corporations. I was wondering, you do a ton of work with nonprofits and educational institutions and healthcare institutions. Just curious from that perspective, as since they're employers, obviously, your thoughts on the impacts to those sectors as well.
Sure, and those employers have are predominantly female. So of course, these issues are very germane to that industry. You have, those in the reproductive space, they're on the front lines right now. They are increasing their appointments. They're thinking about how they can get to border states. They're thinking about how they can assist people with accommodations. And they're also wondering how they can get reimbursed for these services, because that's how nonprofits are looking for grants, and their commitments may not be fully compensated in terms of resources. But outside of the, outside of the reproductive space, you also have organizations that are thinking about how do I support a family raising children that knows that they don't have the financial support. That was the reason why they were seeking an abortion in the first instance. It's usually the nonprofits that become that safety net for that family. And also, how do you also help young people see opportunities when they may be thinking that all of their opportunities for educational advancement and for workforce advancement are foreclosed because they're having an unexpected child. They're thinking about all of these issues. Health disparity, it has also been significant prior to this constitutional, ruling. But now, the expectation that Black women will die is even increased. They already die at a rate of 3 times higher than the national average in, in maternal mortality, and that's expected to increase 33%.
And, Travis, hit something out. When this is focused a lot on the New York audience. And New York audience, we think about people in a tri-state employee. We talked about this right before the program went on. But sometimes so many companies have employees commuting in from places like Pennsylvania, which, while we think it might be another state, it's really not unreal. I know a lot of people who used to commute daily from Philadelphia. And Pennsylvania is one of these restrictive states that has restrictions. You just mentioned, Jeanne, the impact upon some people of color. A lot of people might be requiring Medicaid. Medicaid is not allowing to cover abortions in Pennsylvania. Right. You know what I mean? So therefore, we got to think of the concept. We're not just talking about places that are down south or somewhere in the middle of the country. We're looking right here close at home where some of these restrictions might apply.
And I think one of the other challenges that employers are facing is you may have a New York-based employer where a large portion of the workforce is in New York, but then they may have a small number of employees in other states like Texas, where, effectively the individuals who are actually affected and, are not permitted access to abortion services is a relatively small population. And, the considerations come into play as to how they can protect or advance, access to those services. So even small employers who may just have a handful of employees in Texas are, looking at these travel reimbursement policies, looking at their PTO policies.
You have immigrants as well,
Good,
wondering how this is going to, impact the criminalization of abortion is going to impact their goals of being a citizen in this country.
Oh, yeah. Mamta, could you, I think it might be helpful to discuss the concept of the type of insurance carriers. We just mentioned about the idea of people going through their open enrollment period, but the difference if you're an employer, whether or not, if your carrier is in a certain state versus other states, whether you're self-insured versus state, can you explain that area for us a little bit?
Yes, so employers generally have one of two types of group health insurance. One is what we call a self-insured plan, where the reimbursement is not through an insurer, but is directly from the employer. And the employer has more flexibility in terms of how they design those plans. And for those plans are what we call exempt, enjoy ERISA preemption, which means they are not subject to state insurance laws. So a lot of these restrictions on access to abortions under health plans would not implicate self-insured health plans. So those employers can actually, design a plan that says we will provide travel benefits outside of a state to access abortion. We will have an insurance plan that will provide coverage for abortion services. Fully insured plans are different. Fully insured plans are subject to state insurance laws. So the concern and don't enjoy what we call ERISA preemption And there is the concern that if a state has a ban or a restriction on abortion, the fully insured plan will no longer be able to cover those services for employees in that state. So there is this kind of disparity also amongst, employers who are able to maintain the fully self-insured plans, which typically tend to be the larger employers versus the smaller employers who typically have, fully insured plans.
But Mamta, how does a company that might have people, they might be a New York company, but they have people working in Georgia, they have people working in Texas, people working in Florida, and their insurance, how might that affect that company and the people who are covered by their plans?
What we are starting to see is that insurers, for example, will not cover abortion services for employees located in, say, for example, Georgia, which restricts access to abortion services. So we are we haven't seen it as much yet, but we're kind of going down that path at this point.
There was a question in the, I usually wait for questions till later on, but there's one that I think is kind of direct this conversation on the aiding and abetting laws. So just, I assume also there could be conflicting or competing aiding and abetting laws. It's, ultimately where you could have, Texas saying you have to allow somebody to bring a gun into the office, and you can have New York saying you can't. And if someone does, no matter where their offices are, you're against New York law, and Texas might have the opposite. So are we running the risk of jumping into those scenarios?
Yes. And I think the question also asks, are the other jurisdictions looking to have aiding and abetting laws? And yes, there are. And I think given what might happen in November's elections, we might see one way or the other an increase or decrease in how that aiding and abetting goes. And that's under the aiding and abetting laws. What they're doing is they're being very creative. They're not making them, except for the criminal components, they're not making these bounding laws a state action. They're making them a civilian action, so it's not a constitutional protection issue, which really becomes problematic. And the thing we got to be concerned about is if someone initiates a claim against you, yes, ultimately, after maybe years and years, you might be successful and defended. But think about the downside of years of having to go through legal costs and all the inconvenience economically, business-wise, if you are suddenly hit with a claim or charge and you have to go.
So you've just announced a new competitive strategy. Jeanne, you touched on something that was interesting. I just want you to comment a little bit more on, which is, how companies sort of organize themselves to address what is sort of fast coming Supreme Court decisions or policy being created, and the concept of sort of getting organized internally and creating committees. And maybe you could just talk a little bit more about your thinking about that and how to involve stakeholders. And I know you actually led an effort in our office on gun control. So maybe just a couple comments on that as well.
I think it's important to have the staff know that that you care about these issues. We may not all agree on the outcome, but I think that goes a long way. And to organize focus groups not only at the top level, but also at the lower levels of an organization, and get their thinking, get their buy-in, get their creative ideas. Makes sense. You also want to know what your customers are thinking. You also want to know, if you have people who are sitting on your board, you'll want to engage them as well, and want to come up, I think, together with some solutions. So are the solutions ones of internal policies? Are they making a statement? Are they legislative advocacy? Are they, endorsing buyback efforts that some of the DAs often do? Is it working with some of the renowned organizations that do this work? I mean, I think those are all things that you'd want your team members to weigh in on.
I agree. I mean, Travis, I think you got to think about this too. Some people say to me, what should every company do I think it depends upon the company and your company's culture.
Yep.
You are a company located in New York with New York perspectives and mentalities about how, and I mean New York City, not necessarily New York State, but New York City. Because there are parts of New York State that very well might swing very supportive of these pro-life and other issues or pro-gun issues. So you got to look at the jurisdiction you're in, your employee population. What does your employee population think about? You have to understand your company and the people who work for you. You got to understand the people who are your customers, because as you develop this whole game plan, this is not as simple as doing X, Y, and Z. This requires really sitting down and developing a strategy of how to approach this, because you got competing forces. On one side of the coin, you've got some people in the outside public who might be saying, we want to see something done by you. You've got other people saying, we want to see nothing done by you. You've got some employees saying, if we don't see anything, we're not staying here, or we're not going to come to work for you. You've got shareholders saying, we want to see you do something, or we're not going to think you're a good company for us to invest in. You've got shareholders saying, all I care about is the bottom line. So unless you're making sure profits up, we don't want to see this. You've got certain politicians threatening companies that if you do more than make contributions to my political cause, then therefore we're going to come and punish you. So this is something that really requires some strategic analysis and thought process and some deep dive and homework, not just quick response. And you can't just do nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mamta, I had a question for you too. I was, because I saw obviously in your bio that you're advise clients on executive compensation. And I imagine you're very busy these days. But are these I was just curious, like compensation wise, for executives, is part of their overall kind of package now, thinking about, is part of their job description, are they focused on these things? Are these things that are coming up now in these conversations about how they handle these situations?
Yeah, as I think for the past few years, we've all been hearing a lot about ESG. And I think if we really kind of start with the Me Too movement, I think there has been a lot of pressure on companies to, not just focus on, running the business and the profits of the business, but also on these other aspects of, the ESG issues, having a business plan that also takes into these pieces into account. So, if we were to, for example, just look at the EPA decision, that I think is just one aspect, because I think there was already pressure on the companies to start being more active in the environmental space and, having business strategy that incorporates those factors. But also we, are now starting to see that these components are also being taken into account when devising, compensation arrangements for executives. And, some of these metrics are hard to measure. So, there might not just there are not numerical targets, but they are in some way factored into these arrangements and evaluating what CEOs or executives are bringing to the table.
That's very interesting. Darrell, Jeanne, any comments on that particular topic?
No, I mean, I think whether it be a CEO or any C-suite executive or any manager or even a board member, I think everyone right now is realizing that there is more to this equation than just holding a title and a job. There are a lot of responsibilities in that regard. I'm curious about Jeanne. One side I'm interested in, I've been predicting the last month or two that we're going to have a new increased number of new C-suite levels being called the Chief Social Responsibility Officer. What are you seeing regarding companies? Where are they on designating someone in the company to be responsible for overseeing social responsibility?
I think we are starting to see individuals. I think it's more on the diversity and inclusion space right now. But I agree with you. I think we are moving in the direction where, either that role is going to be subsumed by a larger role, or there may be someone else who has the role of being socially responsible and undertaking that for the company, because, we're seeing it's, shareholders exerting influence, it's employees demanding that employers be proactive. So I think it's just a matter of time.
I would tell any company, I would suggest against incorporating DEI and social engagement. There should be two separate responsibilities. They might be overlapping sometimes in reporting, but I think it's two different issues.
Yeah.
But Jeanne, what do you think? You do.
I think companies have realized that when the corporate social responsibility person was sort of, in the basement and didn't really have much power, and it was a plum job after, doing your 35 years and the stop on the way out sort of, they've realized that that's not cutting it. That's not helping their brand. That's not helping their reputation. That, young people they're not only going to choose where they want to work based on this, but they're also going to purchase based on this. And so it is tied to their bottom line. And I think having somebody more visible with more access to the leadership is the way to go. And you're seeing I would say most Fortune 500 companies have that position.
I just want to turn our attention a little bit to, only because it's the greatest area in the world, to New York. Obviously, a lot of this stuff has national implications, but a lot of the polling data. I think some of the comments we're making about the concerns people have living in some of these restrictive states. Curious if panelists have any thoughts on what is. I mean, I certainly have thoughts, but like, what does this mean for New York? I mean, does this mean we're going to see, if you have 66% of college educated people not wanting to live in places where there's restrictive abortion rules, we're going to see that flux of people coming to New York? Is that going to play a factor in corporate location and institutional location? Just curious to hear anyone's thoughts on that.
I think you've got a mixed flow. I think on one side of the coin, as great as New York is, it's also one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. And we're talking about New York City now versus New York State. And I think, right now, I think I heard the most recent report says that the average cost of a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan is now $5,000. And you're paying somewhere in $3,000 area for apartments in Brooklyn and Queens. So, the expense level of what you have to make just to afford to live in the city is something that people have to consider too. Then you look at the concept of the generational factors, the fresh guys coming out who's 20, 25, 30 versus the ones who are 35 and older who might be starting families. That becomes an influential factor. And then to your point, Rich, it's policy-wise, if it's not a place to work, that people are going to want to work for abortion. Yes, I think that's going to have an impact. But I think the other factors going to have is that one of the concerns I have a lot of healthcare clients, and one of the conversations we had after the Dobbs decision is how is this going to impact them if they suddenly have an influx of people looking to come to New York to have abortions. That's going to be increased workload and demand on them. And we already have a lot of health organizations that are suffering from lack of staff. During the pandemic, the concept of traveling nurses and doctors became very, very significant. I have several friends of mine who are doctors who are working 1/4 of the year they used to work and making the same amount of money by just traveling. So 1 week they just spend 2 weeks in Pennsylvania and they make about a month's salary. Go another week in Tennessee and they make a month's salary. And so they're doing that and loving it. But that means that it has an impact on the availability of staff here in places like New York. And if people start flowing to New York to come abortions, that creates an impact. But then you've got the other things I'm hearing about, and you guys heard about, where more women are getting sterilized to avoid the issue, which means that's also medical procedures. I mean, we've got a balancing act going across the board on all these things that might change the dynamics of how we operate, how we do business.
Good points. Jeanne, Mamta, thoughts?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mamta. Yeah.
I agree with Darrell that, the fact that in New York there's access to abortion-related services may not necessarily create this influx of employees, wanting to work in New York, but at the same time, at the other end of it is you may have scenarios where individuals want to work for New York companies, but will enter into or negotiate a remote arrangement where they can still live in a state which allows access to those services without having, the expense associated with living in New York, so that, they're with a company that has the same mindset and is, a proponent of the same values that they have, without necessarily having to relocate to New York or move into New York.
Right.
And the expansion of telehealth, I think, really helps a lot, so that you don't necessarily have to physically come to New York. I mean, I'm happy that New York is, this is my home, right? That it is the progressive state and city that it is. I do worry that we may get in over our head, as Darrell suggested, in terms of how do you operationalize all of this? How do you operationalize people coming here for abortion? You have the mayor now trying to figure out how to create, more homeless shelter beds. We're a sanctuary city, and all of this is great news for New York City. But we also, the scale at which we operate, I think, will make this very challenging.
And on the telehealth issue, keep in mind the concept of, if these aiding and abetting laws becomes aggressive, like they want to do in South Carolina, where by texting or emailing, having a phone call is considered to be a violation of the law, telehealth won't help.
Interesting. Just for the audience too, a friendly reminder to please put, I know I've seen some of the names in the audience, so I know it's not a shy group. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, as provocative as they may be. Just curious also if some of the panelists could talk a little bit about some of the examples that maybe some of the corporations or nonprofits or institutions have used to kind of address some of this. Like, what are some of the good ways in which they have, responded to policy changes and Supreme Court decisions, et cetera?
I think one of the things that we saw in the benefits space was, even when the draft of the Dobbs decision was leaked, there were many companies that immediately, were thinking about how they can continue to provide employees with access to those services, so that when the decision was actually released, they were ready to roll out, travel reimbursement policies, or, have their insurance policy ready to cover those services, and, send the message that I think their employees wanted to hear. And I think that was a great example of really being proactive.
I like the idea that Dick's Sporting Goods store really walked away from selling guns. I think that is, as big a statement as you can make. Others have, like Walmart have raised the age. So, I think people are along the continuum in terms of what they're willing to do, but it's not without consequences, as we talked about, in terms of what Texas will do to box you out of lucrative contracts.
Yeah, and I think that's a reality, just pointing out that to the degree you're on those lists of being the proactive company, and jurisdictions are trying to punish people by discretion. Basically, you have a few jurisdictions in this country that are trying to take what they want in their local jurisdictions and make it a national issue. I think I read recently where several GOP congressmen are initiating some legislation to ban doing business with certain companies because they're supporting pro-life, not pro-life, pro-right abortion. I mean, it's the level of extension here. I mean, in some ways, it's funny we talk about this today. We've got a minority of the country trying to dictate what the majority of the country should do.
Yep. Hey, look, I mean, when Dick's Sporting Goods made that announcement, because there's one close to where I live, we went out and did some shopping, as a way to sort of thank them for it really shouldn't be courage. It should be what they're doing anyway, but for being proactive about that. And I think that that's going to be sort of an interesting behavioral trait that we're going to have to watch, because I'm hoping that companies will see that as being beneficial to their business.
But it's two-sided coin, Travis. I think it's not just what companies do, but to the degree that any of us individuals have concerns.
Right.
More than ever, the need to vote is most significant because that's where you send support for the company to do the right thing. If you sit back home and complain about how horrible the system is, how
Yep.
bad it is, how unfair it is, and you don't go vote, and you put in elected office people who appoint judges, who make bad decisions, or people who set legislation that creates problem for companies, then you tell the companies that it's not that important to us. And even though you're making good policies, we're not going to support you. Giving a few dollars is shopping is good, but giving them the ability to have the people they need to have to keep the country running correctly is more important.
Yeah. What does everybody, I mean, there is a flip side to taking positions, which is what has occurred in Florida. And some of the kind of nasty reactions that Governor DeSantis has taken towards Disney and others. I mean, I imagine, when these decisions come down, there's just a lot to think about because especially in the situation where you have governmental contracts or governmental authorities and needs, you got to be thoughtful about that.
Some organizations have been accused of being hypocritical, where on the one hand, they're espousing certain views, and then on the other hand, they're supporting the trigger law. So,
Right.
which is it? And I think that's part of it, is that they don't want to. They want to have it built both ways. They want their employees, and they also want to be in good graces in the state that they're operating in.
Jeanne, not only that, but then some companies have been accused of, while they're taking these aggressive stances, of saying we support this, support that. If you look into their PAC findings, they're supporting these very politicians who are making these crazy rulings.
No, it's true. I mean, you have to think about all the political consequences of every donation. I mean, I would love to have, this is probably a longer conversation about the impacts of Citizens United and how that's changed a lot of things. I mean, you're welcome to comment on that. But it's very interesting. So we talked about the same-sex potential, the Clarence Thomas sort of manifesto and the same-sex possibility of rolling back same-sex marriage. What other sort of Supreme Court decisions do organizations need to be mindful of that might not just be focused around a sort of certain controversial policy issue, but maybe around just corporate actions to begin with? We're going to see a loosening up.
I think the top one online is going to be DEI. I can see that being very quickly challenged and attacked. And, while it's been demonstrated to be very productive and beneficial to corporate America to have a very good DEI policy, I could see that being challenged. I mean, you see the challenges already faced with the Harvard education case that's coming up in the fall, and if it wins there, it's going to extend into employees. Next.
Mamta, Jeanne, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think Darrell hit the nail on the head. I think DE&I is probably, I think, on the tops of everyone's minds, in addition to, I think, same-sex marriages.
And contraception.
I mean, the world is unlimited about where they might want to go. And that's what makes it so scary. I mean, where we're heading as a country is very scary. We're departing from the principles that we all grew up believing would represent America, in my opinion.
Right. Do you think, our firm does a lot of work in the sort of MWBE field. Do you think that whole policy that has been, fairly effective, do you think those types of state-based, municipal-based policies could potentially be under threat?
Definitely. I think if you gotta understand something, part of the whole objective on the attacks on the voting issues is because if you look closely across the country, most of the major cities that benefit from those MWBE programs are shifted from being run by male whites to people of color.
Right.
Even Boston has a woman of color running the city. And I've always believed the politics is not about social services or governmental will, it's about money. And with that in mind, to the degree you have people of color who are going to be sensitive and conscious about the concept of making sure all the citizens make money versus just a select few, yes, that's going to definitely affect and be something that they'd like to see go away. I mean, MWE has always been something to challenge. It'll just be enhanced.
Yep. That is frightening. We talked a lot about what companies should be doing, organizations should be doing. Do you have any thoughts on what they should not be doing? What are the sort of best practices to avoid when trying to address this, other than, you know, obviously just kind of ignoring it?
I think the thing they should not be doing is not planning it correctly. We talked earlier about taking time, getting the right team together to do the analysis, not just a couple guys who usually do X, Y, and Z and saying, guys, you know, I know you do this, but let's spend half an hour or so discussing how we handle it. That's not the correct way. You really need to bring a good team of people. If you have the in-house people who know how to do social engagement, you have in-house people who understand the law issues, fine. If you don't, you need to reach out to outside counsel, outside consultants, and sit down and really plan this out. This should be something that's really thought out, considering the company's culture, the company's clientele, the company's future.
And related to that, they shouldn't be doing things that are inauthentic, because then they can be accused of greenwashing, and that, you know, can really get them in more trouble than they need. And so I think what they have to look for are things that are really related to their mission, and you know, using the skills. If you know, we're a lobbying firm, so if we give back lobbying, that makes sense. That's related to what we do. Using the assets, using the skills, and you know, using your culture, as was said, to come up with the right set of activities that you're going to embrace.
Yeah. And also looking at, you know, the message that they are sending, or they're looking to send, you know, as they look at these policies, because, you know, as much as companies may want to, you know, sometimes come across as neutral, you know, the position or the policies they're putting in place, I think from an employee's perspective, are sending messages. And especially in this time where, you know, we are seeing employees being more proactive and actually reaching out to employers and saying, you know, are you putting in a travel reimbursement policy? Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think the message, you know, they really need to think about, you know, what kind of a message they want to send.
And I think that was the long-term planning is so important. I know a lot of companies in the last year have said they're coming out of the pandemic and we're going to require everybody to be back at work 5 days a week. Everyone's going to be working 5 days a week. We're going back. And I think to a certain degree that was short-sighted, because again, as you go to look to recruit the brightest and most talented, and we're in a very different world than a lot of the people who grew up running companies grew up in, including you and I. Yep. We're in a world for the first time where employees have much more of control about where they want to go work than ever before. And we have a Z generation coming out that more than any other generation before is willing to say, I will take the hit on economics because I want to be somewhere I really want to be.
Yep.
It's not just about making money.
I was having a conversation, I was having breakfast with a friend of mine who's an executive at a tech company. And she told me that if they forced people to come in even 3 days a week, they would lose a significant amount of their workforce, because so much of what they do doesn't require to be, you know, there are a lot of people are at home. Now, I've also heard people say to me, look, particularly young people actually want to start coming back to the office because they're missing that sort of in-house work experience that they believe, and rightfully so, that is going to help sort of nurture their careers. So it is a sort of challenging time. And to your point, Darrell, about sort of long-term planning has just become so critical.
Mm-hmm. And again, that depends on your particular company's culture.
Right. Right. We're running a little up against time. I was just wondering if panelists had any other sort of final thoughts. Maybe one last comment to leave our audience with. something that's going to change all of our worlds, of course, profound. And
I think it's a time unlike I think what we've ever seen, and I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of uncertainty, and we don't really know, and we can't really anymore rely on the Supreme Court is tasked with the responsibility of following precedent and having that certainty anymore.
And I think it's a time period of confusion. Companies are very confused as to what to do or not to do because there's no certainty, there's no guarantee, there's no definiteness on what the law says or what the law might do. And I think that means you really, in part of the planning, have to consider all the possibilities and where things might go and what that might mean to how you operate short term, midterm, and long term. This is no longer just, you got to consider all the 5 factors and looking at how every step you take, you can't take a step today because it works today without
Right.
thinking about what that might mean if the ship turns a little bit. What happens then?
And I think they should remember that not taking a position and standing on the sidelines is a position.
Mhm.
And so,
I think that's really well said. Really well said. Okay, well, we're running out of time. Like I said, I mean, I go on and on all day on this subject. I find it fascinating, and I think as somebody who runs a company these days, it's something I spend a lot of brain power thinking about, because so much of how you react relates to how your internal and external stakeholders think of you, and it's a question of corporate sustainability.
Mhm.
So I would encourage the audience to also just, if you have other questions or thoughts or just need sounding boards, to reach out to us. We can put our contact information either in the chat or you can certainly look us up on our corporate websites. Happy to help. Jeanne, Darrell, Mamta, I really want to thank you for all these insights. I mean, I've personally learned so much, and I know our audience has too. There is just so much to think about these days. And again, I mean, we just all have to be prepared for anything. I mean, that's coming out of the Supreme Court or politics or government, et cetera. And just on the Supreme Court, I mean, I would just say, I mean, I think this comment was made before. I mean, it's being driven by conservative and religious political agendas. I mean, there's just no question about that. And I think Mamta alluded to this earlier, but during most of my lifetime, I've always seen the Supreme Court decisions as sort of leading the United States into a
Mhm.
more fair and equitable society that furthers this kind of American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everybody. But it really does feel like it's changed, and it's a wake-up call for all of us. I'm an optimist at heart, and I have no doubt that this is our sort of time to shine, and we will shine. And I think that yesterday's vote in deep red Kansas not to approve a constitutional amendment to ban abortions and recently discussed laws that will likely pass that are going to impact climate change and protect same-sex marriage and address other equity issues gives me hope. But really, and I think this is a comment that's come through on this panel, it's time for organizations, especially our corporations that have really built up so much power, to step up. They have to use their power to pressure politicians to do the right thing, and use that influence to progress, equitable change. And sure, it might have some short-term, financial and PR complications, but there are very long-term benefits for the retention and attraction of talent and how the external stakeholders appreciate it. I was looking for quotes to sort of summarize a lot of this stuff, and it was James Baldwin's birthday yesterday, and I think he said something that struck me that is exactly aligned with what Jeanne just said, that I always remember, which was that those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by others doing it.
Mhm.
And I really think that that's sort of a profound statement of what's going on today. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for your attendance. I want to thank our panelists. You guys are amazing. Everybody should go out and hire all these people because you'll do so much better. Jeanne, always impressed with your intellect on so many complicated subjects, and Darrell, Mamta, you clearly personify how wonderful ArentFox Schiff is. You really do. You should be very proud. Please be on the lookout, everyone, for other and additional future of New York webinars coming up soon. We have a lot in the works that are going to be pretty exciting. Again, thank you, everyone, and I wish you all a wonderful end of summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
All right.